Even when people ask me, so what is healthy masculinity? I'm like, I don't know. Who am I to tell you what that is? But you best believe that I will ask you the hard questions for you to understand, get courageous, and maybe some uncomfortable places to look at you under the productive layers. And from that place, I want you to discover your own truth, not for me to tell you what that truth is.
Yeah. So what do you think it means to be a good man? What? Well, I am really excited to introduce Sean Harvey. He's 25 years of experience in organizational development and systems change. He helps leaders and organizations engage men as a strategic lever for strengthening leadership, culture, and performance. His work integrates men's engagement, leadership development, and systems change across corporate, government, and male-driven cultures. His approach examines how evolving ideas of masculinity and leadership influence organizational dynamics and cultural health, particularly in environments navigating pressure, division, and change. He has served on faculty at Cornell, NYU, and Baruch College, and is currently affiliated with the George Washington University Center for Excellence in Public Leadership. He also serves as a fellow at American University's Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab, PERIL, where he teaches on men, masculinity, and extremism. He is the author of Warrior Compassion, Unleashing the Healing Power of Men, and frequently speaks on strategic men's engagement, an untapped lever for culture change. Really excited to have you here. Really excited for our conversation. Just want to see if there's anything else in your bio that you think we should add for framing, or else I can kick it off with some questions.
No, actually, I think for my bio, that covers it. It's
Cool.
great to be here.
Cool.
And let's just jump in.
Sweet. Well, let's start with with an origin story. What kind of life experiences drew you into the work for emotional healing and transformation for men? What's the motivation behind diving into this man's work?
So I always go, at what point do I want to jump in? So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna start at my 40th birthday. So I've been on Wall Street. I was consulting on Wall Street, organization development, leadership, learning and development. And on my 40th birthday, I had enough. I had enough trying to create miracles in 2-hour increments and intervals, and thought, it's time to move on. So I went to my CEO's office and said I'd lost my heart and my soul on the job, and I resigned as my birthday present. And within 2 weeks, an opportunity came along at Eileen Fisher, basically as an internal change agent, organization development practitioner. I applied, went on an 8-month interview process, and to see if I was a cultural fit. And it was on my first day that I think it was like the gateway to the work. And so on my first day, so I got the job. My 2 bosses sat me down over lunch, said, so Sean, we just want to acknowledge you have proven yourself in the interview process. Now we want you to stop proving yourself and learn how to be who you actually are. When you interviewed with us, you showed us your polish and you showed us your heart. We hired you for your heart, and we want to see less of your polish. We want to see you unfiltered. And so really that was, one, where do you hear that in an organization? But 2, it really was permission to start engaging on an inner journey. And I was at Eileen Fisher for 5 years, and they actually sent me to an artist commune in Canada for 5 months to learn how to incorporate the arts into creative facilitation, as happens in all organizations. And it was there that I got the call to work with men. Now, I left Wall Street to never have to work with men ever. So this was like, this is above my pay grade. This is a spiritual calling. And so I ended up realizing, if this is a spiritual calling, if we want to really create systems change in the world. Now, again, I'm an organization development practitioner, so I think in systems. And so I thought, all right, so if oppressive systems are crumbling around us, what do we need? We need not to rebuild these systems on outdated models, but to reimagine these systems from deeper consciousness and collective wisdom. And what might be getting in the way? And it's leaders, and mostly men, in power, holding on to power from wounding, not healing. So what if we introduce healing to those leaders, begin to transform those systems start to create societal system change. That's just the architecture in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So then I went to seminary, became an interfaith minister, because I knew if we needed to do this work, it had to be at a soul level, and I wanted to do my own inner work around soul healing to be able to engage other men in soul healing. And one thing that happened, though, before I get to what happens next, at Eileen Fisher, I would talk to men in the company, and because it was 83% women, it was a company unapologetically that really held the values of feminine leadership. Men were just transforming naturally, like without men's work, it would usually be a conversation like, yo, I'm changing, you changing? Like, yeah. So and I'm like, okay, what does that look like? He's like, well, my wife said. And it would always start off with my wife or my girlfriend. That I'm more patient, that I listen differently, that I stopped needing to be right all the time and started to be more curious, that I was more emotionally expressive, that I noticed I was starting to tap into my creativity differently, and I was solving problems differently. But every man I talked to in the company said, and I feel more comfortable in my own skin. And so that's really, I think, the origin of this, because I said, we got to bottle this up for more than 200 men in the company. Take this out in the world. And so that began the journey.
It's really helpful framing. And I think it shows how there's a journey of like your own inner work that was required to build both the credibility and the knowledge and the experience that you needed to affect change at the systems level. You mentioned the word healing. So I want to double click on that word for what it means to those men in leadership positions. What does it mean to come from a healing place instead of a wounding place, as you described? And at the systems level, like, what does it look like for a system to heal as well?
So I think, what I've seen in this work is often this idea that the message for many men is men are broken, men need to be fixed. And the reality is men are not broken. That's the first thing I want to emphasize. And, there, even when I wrote my book, some folks would start hashtagging wounded, not broken. How important it is to go from that, I'm not broken, but I might be wounded. And so the wounding can be in any form. One, we're human. So when we suffer, and we don't take the time to do the healing work, and that's not necessarily just therapy, but it could be different types of experiences. It could be somatic personal growth. But to really have the courage to look within to say, what has been hurt? Where have I been hurt? Where might I be suffering in silence? Where might I be struggling? And just to be real with it, to name it, and to work with it, but not from a victimizing way, but from just this is just what it's like to be human.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of our conditioning, we've often just suppressed that, and we just don't talk about it. And when people, and I often think in the work we do with men, it doesn't have to be that complicated. Sometimes it's just bringing men together so they know they're not alone. But more importantly, I find that one of the most powerful pieces when they know I'm not the only one. So the crazy that's in my head, other men have the same crazy or similar crazy, and or whatever it is, but that we are not, so we don't have to carry it alone, and we can talk about it. We don't always have to overprocess it, though. We can just, by naming it, I think that can be powerful. So I think for leaders, it's to have the courage to look within, the courage to what I often say is look beneath the protective layers and be able to be on the journey to discover your own truth beneath those layers.
Yeah, that resonates strongly. I think reflected on my own personal journey. For me, a lot of it has been just being able to sit with uncomfortable or painful thoughts. There's so many distraction techniques available, protection techniques that allow the mind to go somewhere more comfortable.
Right.
And I think the combination, at least for me personally, of being able to sit and with discomfort, as well as lean on support from other men,
Right.
really powerful. Um, what kind of when you say wounded, not broken, um, what are some of the wounds that affect men that hurt?
Hmm. I think of it as we look at, I often say the second piece in preparing for the healing journey. I say it's, can we create community of men with a level of safety that we can ugly cry in front of each other and be held. But number two is to see the world with childlike wonder. And my belief is we had everything we needed when we were born. And then through conditioning, through messaging, through media, through peers, through family, through faith, we just start to pick away. And so I can't tell you how many men I've talked to who say, I'm not creative. Just let's reconnect with creativity. We forget how to play. We can become so stoic or serious. We could suppress the emotions. We lose the connection and intimacy with other men. Sometimes it leads to the fact that we're afraid of other men, especially in terms of performance and like if who's superior, who's inferior, and whatever that might be. Often fear and shame, and I often say untouched grief. And often in the work I do with men who might hold more extreme views on any side of the equation, unresolved grievance, and these things just linger. And if they are suppressed and they're lingering, that can add to more pain, more anger, more rage, more hate. And so if we can get to what's under the surface, and I often say, it's like, the emotions are there. The question is, are they managing us or are we managing them? And so when we do our work, we begin to be able to manage so we don't react, we can respond. But flip side is if we're not necessarily doing some sort of work to be able to really look, then those emotions can be managing us and we're not even aware of it.
Mm-hmm. And so on this podcast, we've explored a bunch of different frameworks, theories, angles on men's work for how to support men, mainly at the individual level in either accessing those emotions or how to finding tools and resources for support in their own journey. But I know you specialize in that journey for sure. You have experience at the individual level, but also have a particular focus on how to grow that at the systems level. So how do you manage change when it's so personal, so complicated, maybe even intense at the individual level, and make it even bigger at the systems level?
I think there's different places for different bodies of work, right? And so a lot of times when I think about doing this work in organizational systems, I'm not necessarily thinking about let's do the deepest of deepest work in an organization. The liability is just too much. The risk is too much. And most organizations aren't going to take that risk. However, what we haven't done is we haven't really necessarily created programs specifically for men. So there's a lot of women's empowerment, women's leadership programs, and with good reason. But if we were just to think about programming in organizations as planting seeds, and so I was the head of personal transformation and well-being for Eileen Fisher eventually. So leading our shadow work, limiting beliefs work, ego relaxation work, Enneagram work, and helping employees really see, a space to just deepen their humanity and to rehumanize and just be full humans. That's what we were doing in the company. And so I really also understand, like, at what point are the boundaries, right? But men would come into those programs, and typically the response was, I didn't know I could learn this about myself. Even from a simple, it's not simple, but, simply offering an Enneagram assessment that can look a little deeper at the shadow And maybe what are the fears we are trying to avoid, and what are the ways we mask up or compensate or overcompensate for those fears that we don't want to touch. So I think there's a place to be able to just plant a seed and then have the resources to say, and if you want to do deeper work, there's a retreat over here, there's a community over here, there's a men's circle over here. But to be able to just create, and again, I think sometimes it's simple as just creating a space to break the isolation. You know, I do a corporate men's circle for an energy company. And at the end of our first pilot, men said, thank you for being forward thinking and for giving us the space to talk about the conversations we didn't know we had permission to talk about. And I think that's some of when we can just give some of that permission, that can be a powerful door opener. And we don't have to hold the whole plethora of transformation.
Yeah.
You know, oftentimes it's when someone gets a taste of what's possible, they want more.
Yeah, that's a really helpful framing and makes sense why you can't ask too much of a given process, workshop, meeting, and that planting the seed is the start and brings the onus and accountability onto the participants to go on their own journey if it touches something that they want to pursue.
Right.
When you've seen these seeds planted or in designing this work, what are the changes you hope to see in an organization? Like what might be visible either in like an interpersonal or a metrics way? Like what do you hope a success story looks like?
Right. So I think I'm going to go to the simplest measure that I have, which is when I walk into a room and I shake the men's hands. When I go from a death grip handshake in the beginning to a hug at the end, I know something has switched open. And often I call it the melt, when I can see a guy move from guarded to realizing I'm not a threat, to realizing this isn't threatening, to realizing this is actually here for him. And then he starts to come into a different level of vulnerability. And I call that the melt. That to me is some of the most powerful aspects of this. Where men can get that awareness for the first time that in a particular setting, they have permission to just relax, let down, and without being told to let down the guard, they just can embody that in a way. Then from an organizational standpoint, I think it's one, when you start to see shifts in leadership, how a leader might be able to handle the relational aspects differently. And so they might deal with inner team or even conflict between them and their employees. They might be able to respond in different ways to the specific needs. So in their team dynamic, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but they understand the unique needs of their employees to be able to either develop them, to guide them, to coach them, or to give them the support or to empower them to be even better. Then you can also see it in terms of, different types of programs that maybe you have resistance in the culture and you see less resistance and more, how can I support? How can I be part of this? And so those types of programs that are humanizing the culture and elevating the voices of all. Right. And so and to understand, I, as a leader and as a male leader, might be blocking others. How do I have that awareness in a way that I can receive that and I can understand it and I can apply it?
Yeah. And especially leadership, the role in the corporate environment is such a people and relationship skill necessity, where to manage team conflict at the individual and group level requires like an emotional deftness of leaders, and so I can see the outcomes through improving those skills, and then that melt
Right.
concept, I I think everyone's seen it at some point, and it
Right.
feels great. It's like you're literally building human connections,
Right.
and that feels good. Builds trust, um, safety, and humanizing the workplace. Like
Right.
brings together more like organic, dynamic teams. Um, Go ahead. You got
Well,
something?
I was gonna say, I think there's also just when you can, because I always look at this as scaffolding. So at the bottom layer is what do you need in the what do you need in a sense of community to have the safety to be vulnerable. And so sometimes we talk also about, wouldn't it be great to have all of our cultures come together? It's like, well, you have to acknowledge some people might be code switching to be able to accept into more of the mainstream culture. So if we have communities that allow that safety as the baseline, so it's also not all men. It might be that men of color or GBTQ men or men in leadership, you know, men who aren't in leadership. You to also understand like what might be the dynamics, the cultural dynamics in play in the organization. That what is the way we can create the greatest level of safety? Then you move up to the next level, which is okay. Now let's bring all men together from all the different groups, and let's figure out, how do we keep deepening our relational skills, our humanizing skills, our connecting skills, and to work through our triggers that might be activated, and just be aware of them, clear them, work with them. And then all of this is in preparation, and as women and those beyond the binary are also doing their work, then we come into a gender bridge building conversation where we can start to say, how do we work across gender and our gender divides differently? And then from there, I think one of the biggest things I saw at Eileen Fisher was how we were innovating and solving problems differently and creatively because we were all transforming in the culture into a different way where we had more access to our creative capabilities. So then we can start to innovate and actually look at how do we solve problems differently? How do we innovate differently? How do we transform our systems in ways that really make the workplace healthier and also more productive and more and improve performance? And then we can actually start to look at how do we transform our culture overall.
Yeah. No, it's such a clear model for how a system can change with the benefits on the other side of doing the work. And now I know you do work in different organizations in different systems
Yeah.
with a particular focus on organizations, cultures that are maybe particularly resistant to this kind of work investigation. Um, I think you described them as hyper masculine
Right.
systems. It could be active military, veteran, law enforcement, religious organizations as well. How do those systems and organizations differ? How might your approach differ? How do you build trust and credibility in those communities?
Right. So first, I would just want to take a step back to a conversation we had outside of this discussion of what I think it takes to do this work. And so, as I shared with you, I see it as the um, as the stomach, the will, the skill, and the cred. So the stomach to work across ideological difference and not flinch. The will, and I ask people, do you love men or do you want to change men? Do you want to fix men? Right? Those are two very different ways we're going to approach this work. Do I believe that if I can see the best in men and we can help men heal and transform, that's going to also then lead to humanizing our systems, right? So from that the inner work to the outer work to the impact systems impact work. And then to understand the skill, which is understanding dude psychology, which is different than like maybe a traditional psychological approach of just what's universal among men, right? And then individual transformation, group process, systems change, and so understanding systems design and systems change. And then having the credibility to stand in front of these guys and be taken seriously. So as I look at that, I think that was the foundation for me as I go into these organizations. So from a cred standpoint, I am looking at what is the invitation that's going to work for the guys I'm trying to reach in these systems and speak and understand the language of the culture of these organizations to understand what is sort of the dude psychology in these environments. To not see them as resistant, but really just see, this is a puzzle. There's a complexity here. How do I have the wherewithal and the capacity to understand the complexity of what's happening so that I can really reach these guys and speak of what is your reality, not what is the reality I think you have. So to really be in an inquiry with these guys. And then last is, again, I might hear stuff that I don't necessarily, or agree with, or it resonates for me, but it's not important in a sense. My most important aspect in doing this work is that these guys feel seen, heard, valued, validated in their experience. And so I operate from a place of open-hearted, non-judgmental curiosity where I don't really share where my views, beliefs, values are. I don't lose them, and if they are crossed, we can have a conversation, but it's not something I'm going to lead with, and I'm not going to let that be a distraction in our work together. And so I think taking that approach helps me go into these systems. And then I'm just exposed to these systems, so then I start to understand, all right, so what are the unique needs of these men, and what are the unique needs of the organization, where it might be less about profit and more about service, definitely about safety. Does it need to be rigorous, and where can it be flexible? And so understanding the dynamics of the culture, understanding the realities of the challenges, and understand the ways to access the men in the systems to be able to actually create movement.
And I think that the curiosity approach really resonates, especially in the current time and space that we live in. It feels to me as if the ideological differences are as great as they've ever been, with the volume as loud as it can be. So I imagine it's even more difficult in the macro environment to come in and come from a place of curiosity. So how do you balance, how do you make it non-judgmental, curious, open? What kind of work did you have to do in understanding that this is the approach that is going to be the most effective?
I think two things. I think one, I've had exposure and experiences that have asked me to really say, okay, how do I separate the humanity of the man from the views of the man? And I can love and respect and value the humanity of the man. And even if I don't agree, and even if I can't stand the views, those views came from somewhere. So what if I start to get curious about, so tell me more about where that came from. Let's just dig in. I just want to understand more about that perspective. So I'm not flinching, I'm not reacting, I'm not wronging, I'm not judging, but I am just getting really curious, because I know that beyond so many of the views that we hold on the left, on the right, on the centrist, because and there's those in the middle that are like, I can't stand either of you. Like, just coming to, okay, let's go into that place of the heart. Let's go in that place of compassion. Let's see this person as a human that just has different views. And I may see those views as, and they're coming from a place of deeper values and belief systems. I think a lot of times when we talk about conflict, we're not talking at the depths that we're talking about today in terms of ideological difference. And so to understand, I'm not here to change your mind. I'm not here to convert you over to my side, right? I'm not putting an ideology or a framework or a way that I think you should hold. Even when people ask me, so what is healthy masculinity? I'm like, I don't know. Who am I to tell you what that is? But you best believe that I will ask you the hard questions for you to understand, get courageous, and maybe some uncomfortable, places to look at you under the protective layers. And from that place, I want you to discover your own truth, not for me to tell you what that truth is. And I think that opens the door. And so when we are in relationship, and when we can see beneath the politics, and I always say, let's go 2 or 3 levels lower than our ideologies, our political beliefs, even our religious beliefs, to say this person in front of me just holds a different perspective than I do, holds a different belief system. And often it feels like where we've come to is a very monolithic way of thinking. That if you are in this box, then you believe all these things. And what I find is when I move out of monolithic thinking into complex thinking, and I'm like, there's a lot of aspects of this person that are more than just one particular view. And even that view doesn't necessarily reflect what it looks like in this person from this person, right? And so when I can really challenge myself to see the complexity of this person and see all the differences in their framing and who they are. And it might be that there's like this much that we don't agree on. It might be this much, but there's also other things that we can definitely agree on around a whole host of issues. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool to hear how you approach it. And it makes sense, right? Because people's views are developed from something that means a lot to them. And what means a lot to them probably means a lot to other people as well, where it comes from a place of wanting safety and prosperity and opportunity, comfort.
So let me even take it further.
Yeah, please.
So at Eileen Fisher, we did a unmet needs exercise with 38 people from diverse backgrounds. And in that conversation, basically the framing is, what are those unmet needs that you didn't get as a child, and how did you react? And now as an adult, when you don't get those unmet needs met, how do you react? And there's often still a reaction, not a response. And then we ask people to prioritize, what is that core need that you must have that often can feel unmet? And when people start to identify their core need, 38 people basically came up with 5. And it's some version of, so to be loved, to be seen, to be heard, to be invited, to belong, or some version of that, right? It could be safety, it could be what those needs are, though. We can see people in their base human needs. That's another way to say it. They're just like, at the end of the day, there's a lot of other layers, but we're still human to human, holding these core beliefs, these core values, core needs that we need, that are going to make us feel safe and feel connected, and be able to have the baseline for thriving.
And it gets wrapped in so many other things that are the symptoms or the indicators of or markers of what it would look like to get that, to feel that. And I feels like that's where things start to diverge, where you have different outlets for wanting and desiring those basic needs. So it makes a lot of sense to me. I'm curious, is the goal for the work, is it the men's work in those organizations specifically, is it to prompt the introspection, and to ask questions of yourself? Is it to make connections with other men, a community, or something else?
I think it's a both and. I think for a lot of guys, our approach is going to be, I'm going to figure it out, right? I got this, right? And then they don't got it. And then it just festers or it builds. I think it's a combination of healing is both, it's an inside job and it's a group job. right? It's an inside job. There's parts of this that have to be some of our inner work that we're gonna have to do. We might have to have some dark nights of the soul. We might have to have some ego death. We might have to do some transcendence. We might have to really look at or come face to face with our fears, our wounds, our pain, our what's unresolved, right? And the flip side of it is when you do it alone. A friend of mine used to say, when it's you, yourself, and you're behind enemy lines because 75% of what you're going to tell yourself is negative, right? So to have where it becomes important for the communal aspect is you have mirrors, and I think we are mirrors of each other's humanity. And so how I treat you might be a reflection of how I treat myself. How I view myself might be reflected in how I engage with you. How you give me feedback of what your experience is and can I take that in or not. And to talk about issues that guys typically don't talk about and realize there's often a sense of relief of, wow, I'm not the only one. Or, oh, I didn't know we could talk about this. Or, man, I have been terrified to talk to other men about this. But actually, when I do, I realize, again, I'm not the only one, or I'm not that crazy, or I don't have to hold this from a place of either fear or shame, right? And so I think that a lot of this to me is when we do it in community, we create a release valve.
Mm-hmm.
Our attempt can often be to create accountability, sure, but I think before that, it's more a sense of community, and a sense of just that, again, that release.
Yeah, and the seen, heard, belonging,
Yeah.
loved. Yeah, I think the multifaceted approach of the individual work and the group work is so important. And I think I'm just reflecting on my own work because I still fall into the trap sometimes of like, oh, I gotta do my work.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta spend my time alone or go for a walk and problem solve. And if I just think really hard in my head about something, I'll be able to figure it out. And I can totally and oftentimes get lost in my own circles. And the mirroring of how not just what someone else thinks, because that's more just problem solving approach,
Right.
but for how they feel towards your problems, your strife, what you're struggling with, can be just as important in just having them like validated, seen and heard.
Right. When I want to go back to when I try to figure it out, and often I'm like, that's the last thing I'm going to ask someone to do is figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And a spiritual guide once told me the movement from let's move from the lies of the mind, which is where the ego plays, to the truth of the heart, to the wisdom of the spirit or the soul, or just the inner knowing. And so when we can go and trust that inner voice, we can trust ourselves and get to what's really in my heart. Then we don't have to figure it out so much. Sometimes then we become into a different alignment with the world, with the universe. But this is typically not the way that a lot of guys talk or think.
Mm-hmm.
We got to figure it out. We got to like use our mental capacity. And we often aren't aware of everything we bought into that maybe isn't actually true for who we are or what we're about. And so to be able to have a different level of discernment around, okay, so what do I actually believe? And often these days, I'm often talking in our place of ideological challenges and difference. What do I actually believe versus what have I been told I should believe? Right? And when we go into that place of discernment to look at, so what do I really believe? What's really true? What's true in the world, but what's really true for me and what's true for me in the world? These are the opportunities, I think, for us to do a different, deeper dive exploration. And sometimes the answers will come versus us having to figure out what the answers are.
Yeah. Is that a separation, like an identification of like this is external and I'm being messaged this and this is mine? What does that process look like when you say looking inside? So
the first two I shared with you earlier in terms of process for the prep for healing. So first, community safety and community of men. The second is seeing the world with childlike wonder, to be able to laugh, to be able to play, to be able to let down the guard. And often we see things about ourselves through our intuition that we wouldn't be able to logically think through when we're using the arts, or we're using dance, or we're in storytelling, or using different modalities that are somatically or creatively based, right? Then we go to the next level, which is surrendering into the unknown, letting go of control. And so that's where I often will take guys out in whitewater rafting, or say, let's just use the metaphor of whitewater. Who's in control, right? And when we're not in control, how do we guide with the water? How do we guide with the elements? How do we guide with the force? And that gives a very practical way to think about the ways I might not be in control, and I don't always have to be in control. And what happens when I'm not trying to control the outcome and can just operate from curiosity, wonderment, awe, and just be, right? And so I think a lot of times for men, we are in the doing mindset, fixing mindset, doing mindset, creating solutions to problems that don't actually exist mindset, to how do I just be and receive and observe in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last piece of the 4 that I talk about is then getting quiet and listening to the voice within and following our inner compass, our sacred compass. There's a knowing within that when we can tap into it, because we're getting quiet enough, we've surrendered enough, we're safe enough, and we are playful enough, that we can start to hear a different knowing within ourselves. So we wrote an article for the Journal of Management, Spirituality, and Religion talking about this. So what is the soul of the company at Eileen Fisher? It's called Nurturing the Soul of the Company at Eileen Fisher. And we asked employees, so what's the soul of this company? And employees said, well, it's Eileen. She trusts the deep intuitive knowing more than empirically based data. She built a company that was $500 million a year based on intuition and trusting the inner knowing and letting go of always being driven by empirically based data. And I think that's significant, because I think sometimes we think if we let go of some of the things we think we need, data, evidence, show me, concrete, prove it to me, that actually can be holding us back from what's a different truth, different level or understanding of the truth, or being able to see into the things that we typically can't see because we're so mired up here and we're not really looking from here.
Yeah, no, that hits really hard for me. I can share personally, like that control element has been something I really struggled with, where if I control enough of these variables and think hard enough about them, I'll be able to control the outcome.
Right.
Instead of relaxing into the unknown, into the uncertainty. And that control also really constricts and limits those other outlets of expression you talked about, the somatic, the playful, which is a critical element into viewing the world in a way that is open, instead of just so tightly controlled. And I've been working on it hard. There is a lot of fear and anxiety behind it, right? Where it's, if I let go of this, then you're out into the unknown, into this really uncertain area, which is living in life in a more open, comfortable, authentic fashion. And I think the other piece that I'm working on is, you mentioned that quiet voice. I identified so many areas of distraction, quieting that voice, saying, be quiet, look at this, like fill your head with this, so you can't hear the voice. And so I think those two elements are so important for I think leaning into the unknown and giving up the control that's kind of a mirage. It's not actually there. And the solutions you're creating in your head, like you said, are to problems that often aren't real, will never manifest. But and your brain's trying to protect you. I know it's trying to
or
protect us.
or it's a distraction for what we don't want to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
But I want to go back to a piece you were just talking about, because I think in the self-help age that we're in, a lot of people just say, well, go meditate.
Yeah.
Go do yoga. That's really hard for a lot of guys to just like calm the mind,
Yeah.
the active mind. And so my recommendation is not go meditate. Go find practices that are meditative for you. So some guys, it might be going and doing a 2,000 piece Lego piece, project, or build a model, or go do some woodworking, go hike in the woods, go sit in the water, like as you're kayaking. Find the activities that are meditative and fit you, versus trying to force yourself into sitting in a room with a yoga mat, trying to meditate, getting frustrated, and your mind wanders. And so in all of these practices, I think and so many of the options that we have these days, it's more of just finding what works for you versus trying to fit yourself into what you think you've been told is going to work.
Yeah, and they're worth trying, and if they feel good and are helpful, then great. But I totally agree. I think listening to prescriptions and trying to force fit something can cause a lot of frustration.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I think meditating especially is just one of the more advanced techniques that requires a level of comfort that may not be the easiest first step.
Right. When I left New York, and moved to Asheville, North Carolina, I discovered just driving in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And so whenever I needed to clear my head, I would just get in my car, go into the mountains, and just drive and do switchbacks. And that became a very meditative practice for me. Just being in the energy of those mountains, and being able to just like relax and release, and then noticing what I was thinking about, as opposed to trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love the framing of like pursuing meditative practices. Doesn't have to be meditation. I want to switch gears a little bit and cover some, I think, educational components. The hype effect.
Mm-hmm.
Can you break that down, define it for us? What does that mean? Why is it important?
Yeah. So when I started this work, so 2 days after saying my vows in seminary, I got the call to work with police. And so saw the video. I was moving to Asheville, North Carolina, as the chief of police in the Asheville PD, talking about reforming the department. And so I reached out as a future member of the community, and because of my background, it led to a one-on-one with the chief of police, and he had 2 asks. 1, can I help him deepen compassion among his officers? And 2, can I create conversations that humanize officers and community members? I said yes. Unfortunately, at that time, they had lost a number of officers to retirements and resignations. This was in the 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of things were going on then, right? But a group of us found each other, and we formed something called Project Compassion, it was me, former FBI, former police, former military officers, masculinity experts, the former head of the FBI National Academy. Like, we were all in this conversation, looking at how do we deepen compassion among officers across departments and into communities. And from that work, I started noticing. So I started working with police, and started working with military, started meeting white nationalists, extremists, and realizing I had a way with a lot of different types of guys, including guys who were holding more extreme views. And it just started dawning on me, oh, these are my guys. I went to my spiritual guys and I'm like, these are my guys. And they're like, yep, those are your guys. So your soul's call is to bring love to hate. And like not wanting to work with men, I'm like, I don't want to do that. And then I just kind of leaned into it, and I just kept getting different experiences where I'm meeting different guys who are holding different views. And the feedback was often they find me non-threatening, they feel safe opening up. And I just started going, well, I don't need to do anything else except just be present, hold space, get curious, and understand where this guy's coming from, what he needs. One of the things that we experienced at Project Compassion was we met with Senate staffers on the Judiciary Committee after the Uvalde shooting. And in 30 minutes, our conversation focused on, in 30 minutes, men's mental health, mass shootings, gun violence, police shootings, police suicides, veteran suicides. I was like, man, that's a lot of hopelessness. And it felt like an avalanche of hopelessness in 30 minutes. And what I started to get was, and I'm going to get to your question on hype. I haven't lost it. I'm just giving some context. What I really got was, rather than meeting men where they are, because I think that could be condescending. Like, who am I to say? Am I coming down from the mountain to say, here's the answer. Here's what you need. But the reality is, so many men suffer in silence in ways they know, they don't know, they will share, they won't share. But to really sit with men in the suffering, not with sympathy, but as I'm just going to sit with you in this and be with you, and I'll help you and understand you and see you and witness you, and then listen for their yearning. Just to meet them in the suffering, listen for the yearning, and offer hope in the midst of both. So I think one of the biggest things we can do is offer each other hope, share our humanity, see each other in our shared humanity. So, doing this work with police and then military, I started meeting these white nationalists and extremists. And started going, oh, okay, so what's really here? What is activating for a lot of these guys? And so the hype effect on men is really, to me, the hate, isolation, polarization, extremism. And it's capital HPE with a lowercase I. It's really that isolation that can be a breeding ground for the hate, polarization, extremism. And as I now teach men masculinity and extremism at American University, looking at the psychological drivers and the cultural influences that are radicalizing men on the right and the left and the right. So it's not like it's one, neither group. Actually, when I think about it, sometimes it's like, okay, it's like a horseshoe. Because I've met a lot of guys who were far left who became far right. And so in those conversations, I'm like, so what was the grievance? What was that thing that moved you from one to the other? And there's a number of issues we could talk about that might have moved someone over, or just realizing I didn't feel seen. I felt left behind. I felt forgotten. And so for whatever the reason, the hype effect is helping to understand where this might be coming from, being curious around where the ideas might be coming from, and then exasperated by isolation and social media algorithms and conditioning and teaching and untouched grief and unresolved grievance and shame and fear and potential hopelessness and do I matter? These things, I think, I call it the stew. It's like anything could be in the stew that might be leading guys to these places, and if we're judging it, we're going to be missing the whole piece. If we're trying to fix it as opposed to trying to understand and really be with these guys in their experience, to understand their experience, and then to say, okay, I'm not going to try to convert you anywhere, but let's just get and tap into the heart. And so often my favorite question is not what's on your mind, but what's in your heart.
Wow, I mean, that's huge. It's big. It's massive. I've tons of questions. I think first I want to go deeper on why does the hype effect lead to place that is extreme? Like why does it reinforce to an extreme point?
It could be any number of reasons. I mean, when I think about extreme, the first word that comes to mind is rigidity. I have a rigid way of seeing the world, and it has to look like this. And where does that come from? And so it might be that this is how I was raised. This might be how I was conditioned. This might be what my comfort zone is. This might be how I was raised as a man. This is how I developed as a man, to see the world very rigidly, very concretely. And then the world doesn't operate like that, and that can lead to frustrations, grievance, So when you think about, and especially as we look at what's happened even in the last 8 to 12 years, when I'm holding on to a grievance and it's unresolved, and then I'm also sitting in a lot of isolation where I'm not talking about this, I'm just kind of shouldering it, or I'm finding groups on like Reddit or these sorts of where other people think like me. I was watching an expert out of Duke, I believe, who's a polarization professor, political polarization. And he said something that was obvious, but it was, to me, like when I heard it, but it also struck me, which is when we're in our like-minded communities and we're building each other up around our own ideological views, we experience a level of cognitive atrophy where we just move from critical rational thinking to emotion and emotional response and reaction. And there's a simplifying the complex, right? And so I think there's a number of reasons why it can lead to a more radicalized view or more extreme view, or and I think where we are also with social media is that our algorithms are often designed, curated for us. It's giving us messages that are going to activate our emotions and often activate our anger emotions in the mix. And then we're like not using critical thinking or rational thinking. We're just following because we're being bombarded by these messages. And then if we're going to the people that are more like us and we're in our own echo chambers, then we're not getting another point of view. And I think what often is happening is we're losing touch with our own identity and our own humanity. We're dehumanizing ourselves. We're losing touch with our own humanity. We're dehumanizing the other, and we can't see them. And often, I think we see these stories, these examples that when you start to meet someone who defies your expectations of the stereotype or the belief you have of that other, and you, one, see they're different than what you've assumed, different than maybe the bias you have. But more importantly, that you see them not from the other, but from their heart. And when we can come heart to heart and really share that even if you want to do me harm, I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to care for you. I'm still going to care for you in your humanity. Sometimes that being held in that way can be what can start to break some of the ways of thinking.
Yeah. And that makes so much sense to me. Why is no one talking about it like that? Why is it so difficult to come at differences and extreme differences with that approach? So why aren't there 1,000 Seans?
Well, I think first, when you hear the four things, the stomach, the will, the skill, and the cred, that narrows the playing field of who actually has that capacity. But I think the most important is the stomach. Do you have the stomach and the moral courage to be able to be with, engage with, and let go of your own belief system to really care about someone who has a different belief system than you? And to really value them, to honor them, and to realize that more often than not, when you're coming from the heart, you reduce the risk of there being harm, right? And so I think there's a lot of the work comes from a law enforcement. How do we curb this? A lot of it comes from a public health perspective. And I talk from a growing number of people that talk about a psycho-spiritual approach. And how do we really blend the psycho-spiritual approach um, into the mix where we don't see people as broken, we see people as whole, who might be wounded and blocked from maybe some of their capacity, right? So when I lived in DC, I've lived all over, but when I lived in DC, I started this thing called Men's Soul Adventures DC. Outdoor adventure meets deeper male bonding meets soul connecting conversations, either existential, philosophical, or spiritual awakening discussions. So if someone's agnostic or atheist or from a different belief system, they're still welcome. And they can be in this and say, what? And often what I would say is, if we want to talk spiritual, here's our sandbox. Whatever you believe in that is beyond your ego and beyond you, we can play in that space. So if you're a secular humanist, if you are about nature, if you are about indigenous practice, if you are about Star Wars and this, we're going to do a Jedi conversation, all of it, as long as it's bigger than you, we can play. And that often opened the door. So when I launched Soul Adventures, I didn't know how many guys would show up. The first 24 hours of launching, we had 52 guys sign up. And then within 3 months, 180 guys. I went to 4 other cities. And within 3 days, we went from 180 to 330 men. Wow. Then I got smart. And I was like, okay, let me ask why. So I'm like, okay, well, why a soul adventure? And so a third of them said, I just wanted a different type of adventure that looked interesting. A third of them said, I just want deeper connection with men beyond the superficial. I want to be able to relate, have deeper conversations. But a third of them said, I just have questions around spirituality and faith. I have no other place to go. I don't want to go to a church. And I just want to be, and I don't want dogma, but I just want to talk about, some of these topics. Sometimes on our journeys, it was psychedelics. Sometimes it was Confucianism. Sometimes it was the Catholic Church. It was like all over the board. And so I started calling it practical spirituality for dudes. And again, I often say this work isn't about us being so smart that we figure out all the answers. Sometimes it's us just learning how to listen for the deeper yearning or hunger of men. And if we can actually tap into that, because most guys probably can't articulate what they're yearning for, but they know it when they see it. So if we can be more adept to just listen for it, we might be able to say, that sounds like what you're looking for is X. Sounds like, this might be something that might be able to help you, and why, right? And that can create it. And so it's in a very more non-therapeutic, non-pathologizing, men are in crisis. And I always get curious, sometimes we're in this kick right now, men are in crisis. I work with a lot of different types of men. Some men think they're in crisis, other men don't think they're in crisis. And I think we have to ask ourselves, from what lens are we actually thinking this is a crisis? And so I think if we can simplify it from an alarmist perspective to a perspective of, we're human, we suffer, we all suffer. How do we hold compassion for the suffering? How do we hold compassion for the fact that sometimes our suffering may lead us down different paths? How do I not reject that person but invite them back in?
Wow, it's super cool. Really appreciate you breaking that down. I think the idea of listening and separating, identifying with what's bigger than you, with you, but it's just as a general, let's break down and talk about all the things bigger than us, kind of takes away the making it super individualized, this is me, this is you, which is a really cool approach. And also just hearing men's motivations for why they engage in that adventure.
Well, I also did my so my second master's is in existential psychotherapy. So I also translate it in another way, which is through the existential questions. And I just break it down into four simple questions, not simple to answer, which is who am I? Why am I here? What am I here to do? And how do I love? So really my motto since the beginning with working with men is authenticity slash identity, purpose, and connection. Those three things. Keep it simple. And those four questions translate back to those three things. And so are we trying to reclaim a sense of identity? Are we trying to reclaim a sense of purpose? Or are we trying to deepen connection? And through all of it, how do we, and when I wrote my book was really focused on a roadmap for men's soul healing as a catalyst for systems change. But the subtext title is how to help men learn to love in a new way. Because I think many of us as men have learned that love comes with conditions. And many of us haven't experienced or don't know how to love unconditionally, especially ourselves. So if we can learn new ways to love ourselves, that expands our capacity to love others. And that also is another element in trying to learn new ways to humanize the other when we have a different level of love versus love for them, as opposed to just trying to figure them out.
Yeah. Like expanding the love to I'll only love you if you believe this or look like this or yeah. And the theme I keep hearing is just going deeper and deeper and more basic and simpler, which is such a powerful way to approach connection. I know we're coming up on time and you have lots of other obligations, so just want to check in if there's any other things you want to share to the audience, people listening, and or where people can find you and read more, learn more.
Yeah. So I think the easiest from a social media standpoint is on LinkedIn. So it's just linkedin.com in Sean Harvey. I would say my program that I'm really most excited about is something I've created called From Circles to Systems, which is bringing men who do this work into a mastermind with other men who do work with men. And we learn new ways to move from individual transformation and group process work into systems level impact work. So from circles to systems, how do we start to bring more of me and more of us out into the world doing this in systems? Because I believe that if we can work system by system by system by system, we can start to do more work around societal systems change. And the other piece that I do is what I call at the crossroads men's coaching. And so really being able to take guys in, not when they're in crisis, but when they're at the crossroads, to say, okay, now let's go through those four existential questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I here to do? How do I love?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you.
Amazing conversation. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so what do you think it means to be a good man?